7 o'clock motion. Minister to move formally. The question is on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion 2 relating to business of the House. Minister to move. Move formally. The question is as on the order paper. The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion 3 relating to suspension of sittings in Westminster Hall. I call a minister to move motion number 3. Formally. The question is as on the order paper. The question is as on the order paper. As many are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move this House to now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There have been huge advances in the battle for women's equality in recent decades, but on some issues we have gone backwards. Chief among them is commercial sexual exploitation.
I would ask that members leave the chamber quietly in respect for the adjournment debate.
Giving someone money, accommodation, food, a job or other services on the condition that they perform sex acts is sexual exploitation and abuse. Yet the global trade in sexual exploitation, perpetrated primarily against women and girls, is bigger than ever before. Sex trafficking is the most profitable form of modern slavery in the world, while violent, misogynistic pornography is consumed mostly by men on an unparalleled scale. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't inevitable. We could and we should have done so much more to protect women and girls. Instead, the past 14 years have been a veritable golden age for pimps and pornographers. I will.
Would the Honourable Lady agree with me that given that under the United Nations Protocol on Trafficking, a victim does not need to have travelled in a vehicle in order to be a trafficking offence to have been committed, yet under the UK Modern Slavery Act, they do. This means that exploiters who are not actually moving a victim in a vehicle from one place to the other are not being prosecuted as traffickers. And this would make a huge difference if there was parity between the two different pieces of legislation to make sure that trafficking as it is was justly prosecuted.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I know that the Minister on the front bench is listening and will likely agree with her as well as I do. So, it's been multi-million-pound pimping websites. They have been allowed to operate freely. Men who drive demand for sex trafficking by paying for sex have been left to abuse with impunity, while the most popular pornography websites in the country have been free to peddle videos of rape and sexual abuse. I will.
Speaker, can I commend the Honourable Lady for Gar for bringing this forward? When she was in this side of the chamber, the Honourable Lady was active on this very subject, and I commend her for that. And to be fair, the Minister who is in her place tonight was also active in this issue. So I'm quite sure whatever you ask for, the Minister will respond in a very positive fashion, and I'd be glad about that as well. But does the Honourable Lady not agree that we must be at pains to ensure that the open border between Northern Ireland and the Republic is not used as a trafficking channel? And would the Honourable Lady join me in asking the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to meet with the Republic of Ireland Government Minister to discuss and agree how we can collectively ensure that this is not a backdoor to abuse and misuse? Thank you so much.
I would like to thank the Honourable Member for his contribution, because as the Shadow Minister for Northern Ireland and working with Women's Aid in Northern Ireland, I know rightly that this is a real problem, and I welcome his offer. Well, it's not for me to join himself and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Minister to discuss this further. And thank you very much for his intervention. But, you know, the previous government stood by this and they let it happen. It's shocking abdication of duty. Women and girls just deserve so much better from their government. Now, I'm looking forward to seeing this new government stepping up and protecting women and girls from commercial sexual exploitation. And in this debate, I'll set out how. First of all, let us be clear. Prostitution is violence against women. Yep. Men who pay for sex are not regular consumers, harmlessly availing workers of their services. Healthy, non-abusive sexual relationships require both parties to mutually and freely want to have sex. Offering somebody money or food or a place to stay in return for them performing sex acts is sexual coercion. It is simply not possible to commodify sexual consent. As the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has stated, and I quote, "Prostitution is intrinsically linked to different forms of violence against women and girls and constitutes a form of violence in and of itself." And most women exploited in prostitution were highly vulnerable before even entering the sex trade and suffer severe consequences as a result. A Home Office report noted that approximately 50% of women in prostitution in the United Kingdom started being paid for sex acts before they were 18 years old, while up to 95% of women in street prostitution are believed to be problematic drug users. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know, and I speak for myself and the member for Swansea East and Neath, when we have met these women and seen the struggles that they have in Swansea city centre, that they are there to fuel their drug use and they're pimped out, and it's heartbreaking. Yeah. And that's how I use my politics. When I think about the most vulnerable people in society, I think about those women that were crying because they'd had their children taken away from them. Yeah. Permanently, that they weren't able to make ends meet. They had to be taken out by their pimp to earn, to feed themselves, and in order to live their lives in a basic way. And I really do think that we should always think about those women when we think about how we talk about women in this house. But I want to read the words of Crystal, a survivor who has spoken out about her experience of prostitution. She said, "I became involved in prostitution in my early 20s, courtesy of my then boyfriend. I now use the word pimp. My body always hurt from the constant rough sex. I'd get jawache from blowjob after blowjob. Group stuff was especially harrowing. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder. I got flashbacks and nightmares when I could sleep. The addiction and the prostitution went together. I sold myself to fund my habit, and I couldn't do it sober. It's just a vicious cycle." Too often in discussions about prostitution and sex trafficking, there is a silence when it comes to the people who perpetrate this kind of abuse, men who pay for sex. So it is only right that I read their words today. Here is what one man wrote on a forum for sex buyers about a woman he paid £100 to perform sex acts on him. "This is a classic case of the pretty ones don't have to work hard. She's Polish, her English isn't good, and I reminded her of the Smiths song. I was reminded of the Smiths song, Girlfriend in a Coma. And while she seemed completely disinterested and mechanical, I finally decided to fuck her in mesh. All the while, she kept her face turned to one side," and I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the language. "As one of her first acts in government, I urge the Minister to recognise the violence that women such as Crystal endure and the harmful actions of sex buyers by adding prostitution to the government's tackling violence against women and girls strategy, just as the Scottish Government has done. So what do we know about sex buyers? We know that 3.6% of men in the UK report to having paid for sex in the previous 5 years. And we know that the level of demand for prostitution varies over time and place. That is because men who pay to sexually exploit women are not helplessly reacting to uncontrollable sexual urges. They are making a choice. And that choice is influenced by a range of factors, including the risk of a criminal sanction. Importantly, we also know that the harm perpetrated when a man pays for sex is not restricted to the individual woman he exploits. As the Home Affairs Committee concluded last year, sex buyers fuel demand for trafficking. The cohort of men who create demand for the prostitution trade is the same cohort that creates the demand, driving the trafficking of women into that trade. So, we've got a group of men perpetrating a type of violence against women that financially incentivises further violence against women. This should prompt a robust legal response from government that holds sex buyers accountable for the severity of their actions. But that's not the legal response that we currently have. In England and Wales, there is a loose patchwork of laws relating to prostitution, with no consistent objective underpinning them. Third-party facilitation of prostitution is illegal in some circumstances, yet permitted in others. Victims of sexual exploitation face criminal sanction for soliciting in a public place, while individuals who pay for sex only face criminal sanctions if they curb crawl or pay for sex with an individual subjected to force. Even then, the law is very rarely enforced. The consequences of this legal fudge are all around us, hidden in plain sight. Across the country, vulnerable women are being advertised online, moved around networks of so-called pop-up brothels. Organised crime groups dominate this ruthless trade, exploiting predominantly non-UK national women. So to give you a snapshot of what's happening, over a 12-month period, Leicestershire Police visited 156 brothels, encountering 421 women, of whom 86 were Romanian. In Bristol, the Police Federation identified 65 brothels over a 2-year period. Over 3/4 of the brothels displayed links to organised crime groups, and 83% of the women in them were non-British nationals. In city after city, women are being trafficked and exploited for one overriding reason: there are men willing and able to pay to abuse them. This has to stop, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's just unbearable. Mia DeFighty, a survivor of prostitution who now trains the police on how to combat commercial sexual exploitation, points to how we should do this. And she says, "Prostitution is what most people imagine it to be: violent and dangerous. In the 6 years that I was involved, I endured a gang rape and 3 separate rapes. The only countries in Europe who are making a substantial impact in the fight against modern-day slavery are the ones who have acknowledged and faced the cause, and that's the demand." Mia is right, and I urge the Minister to listen to her. A growing number of countries and states are waking up to the fact that without demand from sex buyers, there would be no supply of women into prostitution and sex trafficking. By criminalising paying for sex and decriminalising victims of sexual exploitation, governments of Ireland, France, Sweden, Norway and Canada have shifted the burden of criminality off victims and onto perpetrators. England and Wales must be the next countries added to that list. Sweden was the first nation to adopt this demand reduction legislation in 1999, affording over 2 decades of evidence. And these results are stark. Demand has dropped, public attitudes have transformed, and traffickers are being deterred. The most recent research found that 7.5% of men in Sweden had paid for sex. Just 0.8% of them had paid for sex in the previous 12 months. The smallest proportion recorded in 2 decades and the lowest level in Europe. And I, Madam Deputy Speaker, have seen firsthand how agencies collaborate to implement Sweden's Sex Purchase Act, having met police and support workers there tasked with holding sex buyers accountable and assisting victims. Coordinated multi-agency working, backed up by strong political leadership, has been the key to translating their legislation into real change on the ground. Those who want to preserve the right of men to pay for sex have claimed outlawing this abusive practice would simply drive the prostitution trade underground, making it harder to identify victims. But as a study commissioned by the European Commission concluded, there is a logical fallacy at the heart of this argument. Sex buying is largely opportunistic and relies on advertising. Sex buyers have got to be able to find women to sexually exploit, and police can look at exactly the same adverts that they do. If sex buyers can find women being exploited, then so can the police. But solely going after sex buyers is not sufficient to stop sex trafficking. However, we also have to crack down on the pimping websites that enable and profit from this abhorrent trade. Pimping websites are commercial online platforms dedicated solely or partly to advertising women for prostitution. They function like mass online brothels, making it as easy to order a woman to exploit as it is to order a takeaway. Despite it being illegal to place a prostitution advert in a phone box, the same advert can be legally published for profit on a website. Our laws have not kept pace with technological change, and pimps have got rich as a result. As the Scottish Parliament's cross-party group on commercial sexual exploitation found in their inquiry into pimping websites, a small number of highly lucrative websites dominate this market, centralising and concentrating demand online. The sites make it simple and fast for traffickers to advertise their victims and connect with their so-called customer base in towns and cities across the UK. Shamefully, the previous government not only failed to stop pimping websites operating, they collaborated with them. Since 2018, Home Office officials have met with Viva Street, one of the biggest websites advertising prostitution, 20 times. And what has been the result of this collaboration with mass prostitution rings? Well, here is the Home Affairs Committee's conclusion. The threat posed by websites advertising prostitution, the continuing failure of their owners to implement even the most basic safeguards against pimping and trafficking, and the sheer scale of trafficking for sexual exploitation they facilitate is at total odds with the National Crime Agency and Home Office's decision to collaborate with them. We found this public partnership working inexplicable, particularly given the total absence of evidence that that has led to a reduction in the scale of trafficking facilitated by these websites, and the flagrant facilitation of trafficking enabled by, for instance, single individuals being allowed to advertise multiple women for prostitution. The Home Office Affairs Committee, the all-party parliamentary group on commercial sexual exploitation, and the Scottish Parliament's cross-party group on commercial sexual exploitation have been united in their conclusion that to bust the business model of sex trafficking, we have to drag our anti-pimping laws into the 21st century by making it a criminal offence to enable or profit from the prostitution of another person, whether it takes place online or offline. Hand in hand with this anti-pimping law, we need a cross-government strategy to help survivors exit sexual exploitation and rebuild their lives. And that's because to stop sexual exploitation, we have to end impunity for pimps and punters and provide support, not sanctions, for victims. I want to turn, Madam Deputy Speaker, to pornography. I want to turn to action. We need to finally start tackling this rampant sexual exploitation on pornography websites, as well as their wider harms. A groundbreaking inquiry into the pornography trade by the all-party parliamentary group on commercial sexual exploitation concluded that we can't simply not end the epidemic of male violence against women and girls without confronting the role that pornography plays in fuelling sexual objectification and sexual violence. The fact that government has hitherto failed to tackle even the most egregious abuses perpetrated by this predatory industry is not because it has proved too difficult, but because there has not been sufficient political will. And that has to change now. The findings of the group's inquiry were extensive and unequivocal, and I urge the Minister to study them carefully. I want to highlight just a few today. Firstly, pornography consumption fuels sexual violence, and there's extensive evidence from experimental, non-experimental, longitudinal and cross-sectional studies evidencing this. Research indicates that pornography influences viewers' so-called sexual scripts, shaping their understanding, expectations and decisions in relation to sexual behaviour. Pornography also serves to dehumanise and sexually objectify women, fostering attitudes that underpin violence against women and girls. Secondly, illegal content is freely accessible on mainstream pornography websites. Lawlessness characterises the online pornography trade, with films featuring child sexual abuse, rape and trafficking victims found on some of the UK's most heavily visited sites. And thirdly, the inquiry concluded that sexual coercion is inherent to the commercial production of pornography. And here I want to quote the words of Alia Dewis, a survivor of pornography and trafficking, who now works to support other survivors. Alia was just 20 when she was first paid to perform in pornography. Giving evidence to the all-party group, she recalled, "When I did not want to consent, when I was feeling uncomfortable, unsafe or unwilling, I did not have the freedom to leave that shoot without repercussions. I did not have the freedom to leave and know that I wasn't going to be sued for breach of contract." Experienced that immense pressure to participate in film sex acts because on a previous date she had signed a legal contract to do so. This is commercial sexual exploitation. And like too many other women, Alia was subjected to a horrifying level of sexual abuse in this so-called industry. And she bravely spoke out. There are simple, practical steps that ministers can take now to rein in the lawless activities of pornography sites and implement basic safeguards. And these measures should include the making of regulation of pornography consistent across the online and offline spheres as recommended by the BBFC. They should include requiring online platforms access from the UK to verify that every individual featured in pornographic content on their site is an adult and give permission for the content to be published there. And safeguards must include giving individuals who feature in pornographic material access from the UK the legal right to withdraw their consent to material in which they feature being published or distributed further. We have the power to make that burden a little lighter, Minister, by giving individuals who feature on pornography websites the legal right to have that content taken down. And I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable friends on the front bench, the Right Honourable Member for Hull North and Cottingham, now a Minister of State in the Home Office. Labour voted in support of her amendment, but it was blocked by the Conservative government. Now Labour is in power. I hope that we will see vital safeguards in a government bill soon. In opposition, Labour could only use words in the fight against commercial sexual exploitation. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can use deeds. This government must shift power out of the hands of punters, pimps and pornographers and place it into the hands of women and girls. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well, I am grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Gower, for securing this debate, which, as she has pointed out, is in fact my first as a Home Office Minister, although definitely not my first on this subject by any stretch of the imagination. I would just say from the outset that it is a privilege to have been asked by the Prime Minister to serve and to work on some of these issues that I have devoted much of my life to, both inside and outside this building. We have an enormous task on our hands, and debates like tonight underline why that is so critical, that we make real progress in protecting women, and in fact in this instance men as well, but all people from harm. We know that sexual exploitation disproportionately affects women and girls, and as I've said, it affects men as well, although it happens, of course, that those who are buying sex tend to always come from the same group. It's time we treat tackling violence against women and girls as the national emergency that it is. The new government policies will be announced in due course, but I want to restate that I believe passionately that change in this area is needed, and until it is achieved, we must not rest. On hearing accounts like we have heard tonight from my honourable friend from the Gower, I'm not sure how you could come to any other conclusion. I will continue to work closely with charities and NGOs, and have met almost all of those that were mentioned by my honourable friend, to support services to advance efforts to protect survivors and hold perpetrators to account. So, turning to the specific points of the debate, this government will use every lever available to stop commercial sexual exploitation and sexual exploitation of all kinds. We are committed to tackling the harms it brings. The most vulnerable in our society deserve nothing less. It is undeniable when looking at commercial sexual exploitation that we have to consider carefully those who are exploited under the guise of completely legitimate prostitution. This is, in my view, often the argument that comes back, and not one that I feel we should recognise. We are only a couple of weeks into the new government, so I hope members will understand that I am not in a position today, it's literally been 2 weeks, to make the commitments on specific policies. But I want to make it clear to the member for Gower and all others here that they will be coming on this area, and that she has my word that I expect change in this space. Currently, the acts of buying and selling sex are not in themselves illegal in England and Wales. However, there are activities that can be associated with prostitution which are offences. These include activities linked to exploitation, which she talked about. The Sexual Offences Act of 2003 makes it illegal to pay for sexual services of a prostitute subjected to force, threats or any other form of coercion or deception. This is a strict liability offence, meaning it is not a valid defence that the defendant didn't know the person was being exploited had been subject to force or coercion. I, as she has pointed out, have very grave concerns about how well this is actually working in practice. I am happy to say from here, it isn't. Like so many of those we seek to get convicted on crimes of violence against women and girls, the numbers are woeful. We want to understand the scale of the issue and how best to respond to it. The Home Office is currently providing £1.36 million of funding to Changing Lives. I make a declaration that I was the chair of Changing Lives Adult Sexual Exploitation Partnerships. I am no longer, to address the current gaps in evidence around the levels and types of online abuse and exploitation that are happening, to help us better understand the pathways that are needed to improve the support. This is important work, and I would like to thank Changing Lives for their amazing work in undertaking it. We're also providing $378,000 of funding over 2 years to Trevi Women, who provides trauma-informed support to women survivors wishing to exit on-street prostitution. We are aware of the different legislative approaches to prostitution, such as those implemented in Northern Ireland and in different parts of Europe. There are a wide range of potential legislative approaches. Further work is needed to understand the options that we will have as a government. I will work with the NGOs and charities to explore these options, ensuring that the protection of women and girls from exploitation is at the forefront of our approach. Trafficking of women and girls for sexual exploitation is a horrific crime, and we are determined to safeguard victims and to bring ruthless perpetrators of this crime to justice. This means ensuring that the police are relentlessly pursuing those perpetrators who pose the greatest risk to women and girls, using all the tools at our disposal to protect victims and get dangerous perpetrators off our streets. As I'm sure you're all aware, sexual exploitation is a significant part of the trafficking space in this country. We will build on the Online Safety Act to ensure that online companies fulfil their duty to eradicate this exploitation from their sites. There is much work to do in this particular space, as has been highlighted by my honourable friend, and I have handled many cases where this has not been handled well at all. I myself, there are images of me on pornographic websites that I cannot get taken down. We will use every lever to halve violence against women and girls in the next decade, in the Home Office and across the whole of government, with policing and other experts. The demand for commercial sexual services fuels the exploitation of women who are forced or coerced into prostitution. The use of commercial sexual services should not be normalised, and we will look across government to use all the levers available to change attitudes in the longer term, reducing demand for commercial sexual services and protecting women from exploitation. There has been huge advances that we hope to see as well in sex for rent, and I want to tip my hat to the now Secretary of State for Science and Innovation.
Order, order. The House stands adjourned.
Yeah.